humans around them. And that fact was remembered many times during their journeys by their enemies. They would say, we know what happened when they left Egypt. We know what happened to the Egyptian army. And now they're trying to invade us. And it put fear in their hearts. Okay, cross the Red Sea. What else? Say again. Ten Commandments. And I guess if they got them, Moses had to remember them because he threw them down and broke them. But we know what they were. And what happened while Moses was away getting the Ten Commandments? Built an idol. They know now that the idol worship was not acceptable. Probably knew it then. Why would they have known it? They made a covenant with God after Moses came down. But a covenant was made. And God told them what's expected of them. And what did they say? We'll do it. We'll do it. Whatever God says we're going to do. Well, that didn't last long. It was before Moses went up that the covenant was made. They broke the covenant almost immediately. And it was restored later on, but with some difficulty we'll read about tonight. They built the tabernacle. And Lee has gone through the furnishings of the tabernacle and all those things. And the tabernacle, even though it was a tent, and that's what the word tabernacle means, it was a tent, but it was only because it wasn't a permanent structure. Had it been a permanent structure, it would not have been a tabernacle, as we saw in the temple later on that Solomon built. The tabernacle was not a tent as we know it. It was a beautiful, beautiful thing. Eyes haven't seen it to write about it now, but we do read what it was consisted of: gold and silver and copper, linens that were woven with cherubim. We don't know what cherubim are. We know they're some type of an angel. I don't know how they wove images of them, because they couldn't have known either. But they were told to do that. And even the top of the tabernacle was of white, woven with cherubim woven in it, so that if you're in tabernacle, you look up, you see this beautiful handwork.
How many people actually saw that?
Saw the tabernacle?
Saw the inside of it?
Oh, only the priest. Now, the priest had an order of, well, at that time there weren't that many priests, but yeah, only the priest would have seen it.
We hear and see more of this than they actually saw. All they saw was outside of it.
Yes.
The majority of the people. I guess maybe they saw it when they took it apart.
Yes, and the Levites took it apart, but the only thing they didn't see was the tabernacle, the chest, the Ark of the Covenant. And the reason they didn't see it was they were instructed to take the veil down off the hooks and walk forward with it, so it blinds them from the Ark of the Covenant, and then they lay it over the Ark of the Covenant. I looked up some things today. Metal only, just metal. Gold, there was 2,204.85 pounds of gold in the tabernacle. Today's spot price for gold is $20.04. $59 million, $272.20. gold. Silver, there was 7,584.38 pounds of silver. At $25.48 per pound, it was $19,324.03. Copper, 5,338 pounds. At $4.08 per pound, it's $2,177.90. Total of metal only was $80,774.13. That's in today's dollars. Where did they get this kind of wealth? Got it in Egypt. They asked for it. They asked for it from their Egyptian neighbors, and God made those people have the spirit of giving, and they gave them a lot of things. In fact, they probably destroyed Egypt's economy for a while. So much wealth was taken out. Besides the metal, there were the coverings. As I say, you had that white covering to be seen as you looked up. There were coverings of animals, especially goats, and it's believed that the goat hair was left on the hide, and that provided soundproofing and some resistance from the elements. There were, the New King James says badger covers. Now, most people believe that there's no way those are badger covers. There's some kind of aquatic animals, such as a dolphin, so they'd be waterproof. And it is the top layers, the waterproofing layers. It's never mentioned that there's a ridgepole, such as down the middle of this, that would hold the coverings up at an angle that would shed water. It doesn't mention it. It talks about the hooks and the ropes and the things that would peg it in the ground. But if it had a ridgepole, we don't know. Otherwise, how did it shed water? It almost have to have. But it's not mentioned. So the total cost would be just astronomical, even in that day. But it would be a beautiful, beautiful structure. It wouldn't be just a tent. It would be the place that God had asked to provide for him to be near them. And they could look at it and know that God was there. The covenant was based upon their obedience. If you will obey me, and they all said yes, they would. And they tried to live within the coordinates of God's law. But they were sinful people, just like we are. Maybe, hopefully, more so than we are, because they are stiff-necked. God calls them stiff-necked, and we need not to be. And God saw their need, and he designed a system of priesthood that would mediate between he and they. If you were a normal Israelite and you had a sin, you would go to a priest. And he would tell you what the offering would be, and would help you make the offering and go through the procedure with you. Once a year, they had the Day of Atonement, where the sins of the country were put forth. And there were sacrifices. And on that day, a special sacrifice, I think we talked about a few weeks ago, of the two goats. The one that was sacrificed for the sin, the other that was turned loose in the wilderness. And it bore their sins out into the wilderness where they weren't bothered with their conscience. Why was blood used in sacrifices? We're told why blood was used, because the life was in the blood. And so these substitute animals that gave their life, they didn't have sin. They walked quietly to the place where their throat was cut. They died for the sin of the people. Very image of Jesus Christ that we know today and think about each Sunday morning as we partake of the Lord's Supper. These things were written and established not only for them but for us to look back on, and including the tabernacle. It has a lot of things that reflect what we do today. Well, they spent a year there. They're not left yet, but they're preparing to leave. In addition to building the tabernacle, they made garments for the priest. Very elaborate garments, including the undergarments. And the stones that were put on the ephod, 12 stones, one for each tribe. All these things had to be made and cut and fastened, overlaid with gold. How were they able to do that? Brooke's looking at me like he knows. There were craftsmen, just as, you know, any group of people have craftsmen. They had their craftsmen. And Danny Guthrie is our craftsman. But in addition to that, God gave some of the people special knowledge and special abilities. And it was God-given that they were able to hammer out the gold into the things that they wanted and overlay all the acacia wood and all the furniture. Everything was gold, except the sockets for the post in front. They were copper or bronze. And yet even the bronze would shine and be beautiful. What was the first Passover? What day of what month? Who knows? What day? 14th. And the month was, I'm going to pronounce it Abib. So, on the 15th day of the first year, Israelites left Egypt the day after the Passover. And they left with what kind of bread? Unleavened bread. Day after Passover, they left with unleavened bread. Later on, the Feast of Unleavened Bread will include the Passover and 7 days involving the Passover, and somewhat of a remembrance of this. 15th day of the second month, they arrived in the wilderness of Sin. Exodus 16:1. Now, S-I-N, sin, is not disobedience to God. This was a region that was called Sin. In fact, if you think of Mount Sinai, you think of S-I-N-I-A, Sinai, sin, being the first 3 letters. At the end of the 40 days, the people said what? We don't know what's happened to this man, Moses. He's been gone 40 days and 40 nights. And they asked Aaron to make them a god. And Aaron did. Don't know why, but Aaron did. When they built the golden calf, they broke the covenant. They no longer had a covenant with God. Moses intercedes, and again, we'll read about this shortly. He intercedes with God and very bravely says, and I'm using my words, if these are not going to be your people, then I don't want to be a part of it either. Moses returned to the mountain, this time stayed another 40 days and 40 nights, didn't eat or drink any time he was there. The next 6 months at Sinai, they built the tabernacle and all its furnishings. They prepared garments for the priest. First day, first month, second year, they set up the tabernacle. And the next 7 days, Aaron and his sons were consecrated for the priesthood. Eighth day of the first month, Aaron and his sons began their work as priests. And these things are, I was talking to Mike earlier, these things are not easy to follow because you got Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. All four of them contain parts of the law and the consecrations and all the things that have to do with what's expected of them. And thank goodness we don't have to live under that law, because I can't understand the sacrifice system. Maybe if I lived it and had animals I would understand, or the priest could guide me, but right now just reading about it, it doesn't jive with our way of life, so it's hard for us to realize what's going on. But again, we know the animals were a substitute for their sins. 14th day of the first month of the second year, the people observed the Passover. It's been exactly 1 year since they left the night of the last plague in Egypt. In the first day of the second month, second year, they began counting and organizing the people. They count the soldiers, found out in numbers. They organized the tribes in their correct camp in order and march in order. And they take the Levites instead of the firstborn. They count and organize the Levites in age brackets to work. It's told that the way they camped around the tabernacle, they did it by tribes. And each tribe had a banner, had a flag. And I'm sure, it's not said, but I'm sure that they carried those flags into war just like nations do now. And in fact, they had one battle. You remember, as we talked about the first year, they had a battle that Moses had to have her and Joshua hold his hands up so he could hold his stick up for them, a walking stick for them to win. But they were not soldiers yet, even though through God's help they won that battle and will win the others. But they're slaves who have come out of Egypt. In the 14th day of the second month, second year, those that were unclean from the first Passover were told that you can observe the Passover 1 month later. And why would they be unclean? What are some of the things that make them unclean?
Actually, dead body.
Okay. Dead bodies. And are there anything else? That's the main thing. I think maybe leprosy, contact or near or whatever would be another, but there were some who could not partake of the first Passover, the second Passover, after the second year. And then in the 20th day, the second month, the second year, it's time to leave Mount Sinai. And what did they leave as? What did God promised Abraham. They are a nation. First time they are a nation because they're in a covenant relationship with God. They are leaving to go to the new lands. And there is some dispute about how long the Israelites were in Egypt. 400 years is the things that we generally hold to. 430 is mentioned at another. And then there's one passage in Galatians that puts the period of years back to the covenant with Abraham, which would make the time in Egypt something over 200 years. Either way, it's time to build a nation. And it's a Jewish nation. The world had never seen a Jewish nation. Something new. It's God's people. And they were Jewish because of, by act of circumcision. I would assume that Isaac was the first Jew, if not Abraham. But the covenant of circumcision made them a Jewish nation. All right, let's look at chapter 33. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Depart and go up from here, you and the people whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt, to the land of which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, to your descendants I will give it." You notice here God is saying, it's time for you to go and the people that you brought up out of Egypt. He's not referring to them as my people at this point. He's still not wanting to lead them. And he goes on to say, I will send my angel before you, and I will drive out the Canaanite, and the Amorite, and the Hittite, and the Perizzite, and the Hivite, and the Jebusites. Go up to a land flowing with milk and honey, for I will not go up in your midst, lest I consume you on the way, for you are a stiff-necked people. God said, I'm not going. You are a stiff-necked people. You can't be led. Moses, I'll send my angel, and he'll help you drive the people out of the land that's been promised. But I better not go, because I will consume you. Verse 4, the people heard this bad news. They mourned, and no one put on his ornaments. For the Lord had said to Moses, say to the children of Israel, you are a stiff-necked people. I could come up in your midst in one moment and consume you. Now therefore take off your ornaments, that I may know what to do to you. It's believed that the ornaments are their jewelry, earrings, their nose rings, their necklaces, anything that shows the gaiety of their occasion. So the children of Israel stripped themselves of their ornaments on Mount Horeb, which is another word for Mount Sinai. Moses took his tent and pitched it outside the camp, far from the camp, and called it the tabernacle of meeting. And it came to pass that everyone who sought the Lord went out to the tabernacle of meeting, which was outside the camp. I read somewhere, it was like 2,000 cubics outside the camp, 18 inches, foot and a half, times a foot was 3,000 feet. I couldn't find that again. And I'm sure it was some man's reckoning. But 3,000 feet is over a half mile. He really went and found a place outside the camp. We don't know how many people there were, but it's been told how many soldiers there were. And I believe the number was 600,000. That's men who are able to go to war. We don't know how many fathers and mothers of these 600,000 people were alive who weren't able to go to war. We don't know how many were married, how many had children. We can only estimate there was at least 1.5 million people, possibly 2 million. And how they were able to camp and have any privacy, I don't know. But Moses took his tent. It's called the tent of meeting. It's not the tabernacle. They're two different things. And he went outside the camp, pitched it. Verse 8, so whenever Moses went out to the tabernacle, that all the people rose and each man stood at his tent door and watched Moses until he had gone into the tabernacle. And it came to pass when Moses entered the tabernacle that the pillar of cloud descended and stood at the door of the tabernacle. And the Lord talked with Moses. Where did the pillar of the cloud come from? It left somewhere and descended in front of this tent of Moses. And where did it leave from? Well, you know it was at the tabernacle. The cloud that by day led the children. When it stood still, they didn't go anywhere. By night, fire, and they would follow it. But this cloud lifted up from the tabernacle, went and stood in front of the door of the tent of meeting that Moses had set up. This was supposed to help him in not having to climb that mountain every day. He needed some consultation. He could meet with the Lord if it was a half mile, it was a half mile, but it wasn't straight up. So, verse 11, so the Lord spoke to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend. And he would return to the camp, but his servant Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, did not depart from the tabernacle. That is, again, something that's hard to imagine, that God speaks with Moses face to face, like we two men would talk. What a wonderful thing for Moses to have developed that kind of relationship with God. And to be able to talk with him without stuttering or without, which he did in the past, you know. When he was called the first time, he had a hard time talking to God. And he said, my speech is not that good, John. You ought to send somebody else. But here he is. He meets God face to face as such, and he talks with him as a man would talk to a man.
You don't think he actually saw God's face, or is this just kind of showing the intimate relationship they had? Because later on in this chapter, God says, you cannot see my face.
Yeah, no, I do not think he saw his face.
Okay.
And that's the reason, I guess, because he certainly made that clear. No man can live and see my face. Now, they talk about Joshua as a young man. In Joshua 24 and 29, Well, better get to 24. And it came to pass after these things, after the conquering of the land and everyone settled in and it's been divided, Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died, being 110 years old. Now, James says we can know a date and back up, and we've tried to do the same thing here. We can't be certain. We can't be certain. But if he died at 110, took about 3 years to conquer the land, they wandered for 40 years, and we don't know what time it took to go from Sinai now to the land where they wouldn't go in. But probably another 10 years. So it's thought that Joshua was going to be around 50 years old at this time. And he says, or the word says, Joshua, a young man, did not depart from the tabernacle. We know that the children, as they moved to the land of Canaan, their clothes didn't wear out, their shoes didn't wear out. God made all those things last. Maybe 50 years old, Joshua might have been as young as some of them, the young men here. But it seems that he would not be a real young man. Then Moses said to the Lord, and this shows Moses' bravery in talking to the Lord. You say to me, bring up this people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. Yet you have said, I know you by name, and you have also found grace in my sight. Now therefore I pray, if I have found grace in your sight, show me now your way, that I may know you, that I may find grace in your sight, and consider that this nation is your people. And God said, my presence will be with you, and I will give you rest. And he said to him, if your presence does not go with me or go with us, do not bring us up from here. For now they will, for how he passed by, he held his hand to cover his backside. But still, it was a sight that caused Moses' face to show. Go ahead, man. I won't take all of Joe's teaching the class next week, and he'll want some material.
Good evening. I think all the boys have finally made it back up the hill. I'm not sure what they were doing, but I think it's safe to say, but assumption on my part, you ever had a plan not go the way you thought it would go? Maybe not come to fruition? And that can go two different ways, right? Some plans, turn out way worse than we thought. Have, something that disrupts it, or bump in the road, curve ball thrown at you, and just goes south. But then other times, maybe the plan doesn't turn out the way you thought it was, but that's a blessing in disguise, and it turns out way better than you could have ever thought of it. Obviously, most of us know we've been talking about Exodus on Wednesday nights. And when you think about the Israelites, the plan they had obviously didn't coincide with what God had for them. They clearly, I think, thought they would just walk out of captivity and go to the promised land to be theirs. And when it didn't go the way they wanted it to, they started to grumble, and their faith waned, and obviously the punishment was most of them didn't make it. And for us, a lot of times the same can be said for us. If our plans don't go the way we want them to, we get pretty upset. But there's really only one foolproof plan, and that's the plan of salvation. Every other plan has fallacies in it. Every other plan's imperfect. And at the end of the day, we really don't have as much control as we think we do. But you can have a little control over your eternal fate by going through that plan of salvation. And like I said, it's the only one that's guaranteed. It's the only one that we know what's going to happen in the end. So tonight, if there's anything we can do to help you with that plan of salvation, if there's anything we can do to, if you haven't been baptized, tonight's a great opportunity. Or maybe if you faltered in your walk, we're glad to pray for you tonight. If we can do anything at all, please come as we stand and sing.
Have you been to Jesus for the cleansing power? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you fully trusting in His grace's heart? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you washed in the blood, in the soul cleansing blood of the Lamb? Are your garments spotless? Are they white as snow? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Lay aside the garments that are stained with sin, and be washed in the blood of the Lamb. There's a fountain flowing for the soul unclean, only washed in the blood of the Lamb. Are you washed in the blood, in the soul cleansing blood of the Lamb? Are your garments spotless? Are they white as snow? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Please be seated.
We do thank you for being here this evening. For those that are visited, we appreciate you coming and being with us. We want to continue to remember some that we have been talking about. Terrell mentioned Steve Willis have a defibrillator and a pacemaker in today. We hope that went well with him. Also, Lindsay Hogan had a problem with some speech, and they carried her to the hospital and found out that she had a blood clot on her brain. And they have operated and taken care of most of that. She is speaking now and walking some, so that's a good sign. We want to continue to remember her. Things gets well with her. And also Nathaniel has been having some respiratory problems that he was supposed to go to the doctor this week. Keep that family in your prayers. They got their hands full right now with their problems. Again, it's good to see everyone here. Appreciate you coming. Be safe going home. We'll have our closing prayer.
Almighty God in heaven, we're thankful for all the blessings that you give us, Lord, and we're thankful for the opportunity to come and learn about the children of Israel as they left Egypt and went towards the promised land, Lord. And we're thankful for the good news about Lindsay Hogan and her recovery that she's had over the last day, and we ask that you continue to be with her and help her to continue to recover, and that she'll be regain all her function, Lord, and be back where she was before, Lord. And we ask that you be with Nathaniel as well, as he's dealing with his health issues, and that those will be taken care of, and that generally, Lord, you just watch over us and take care of us. And we ask that you forgive us of our sins. In Christ's name, amen.